And right now we are 2 minutes away from the end of the trading day. Romaine Bostick here with Katie Greifeld taking you through to that closing bell. It's a global simulcast. It started. Massar, Tim Stenovec pop up on the screen. Welcome to our audiences across all of our Bloomberg platforms, television, radio, our partnership with YouTube here. A down day here in the market, really the second straight day that we've seen meaningful selling, particularly meaningful selling, Massar, into the closing bell.
Yeah, absolutely. Like ending on a down day as we get ready to kick off the start of a third week of the U.S. war in Iran. Having said that, you dig deeper into some of the indices, even the S&P 500, kind of an even split, guys, in terms of names that actually gained and lost on this Friday.
Yeah, just taking a look at what happened with commodities and specifically with oil. I mean, Katie, we are seeing another day where Brent closes above, or settles rather, above $100. It's at 102.63 right now. WTI at $98 a barrel. So far this year, both of those up close to, well, WTI up more than 70% and Brent up 69%.
Yeah, absolutely. As I said at the top of our show, it feels like oil is really the key to so many different asset classes right now, especially true when it comes to equities. I will note, Carol mentioned we're about to enter the third week of the war. We're about to close out the third week straight of losses on the S&P 500. And again, it looks like we're going to finish up around our session lows of the day on this Friday the 13th, by the way.
Yeah, it's you keep bringing that up. I keep trying to ignore it.
Triskaidekaphobia. Let's say it all together.
I just point out that the Bloomberg Commodity Index up for a fourth straight week here, and that big rise that we've seen in oil. Mo Hagman was talking about this idea that the real pain point for financial markets, for equity markets, is really a lot higher than where we are right now in that 120 to 150 range. But we can't ignore the fact here that just this month alone, basically since the war started, we're up 40+% here on WTI crude, and that doesn't even take into account the big moves higher in jet fuel, in gasoline prices, in fertilizer prices, et cetera, around the board. Red across the screen in U.S. equity markets. I guess they're contractually obligated to clap and cheer, but the Dow Jones Industrial Average down 100 points on the day, down 0.2% on the day, and it's going to close out the week lower by about 2%. Similar moves are the other indices, with the S&P down 0.6% on the day, about 2% on the week. The NASDAQ Composite down about 0.9% on the day, on 1% on the week. And the Russell 2000, that's actually a relative outperformer. It's only down about 0.4% on the day, but still losing about 2% to close out the week.
All right, Romaine, back to the S&P 500 I go. 257 names in that index, actually higher here on this Friday. You've got 243 to the downside, and Katie, 3 unchanged.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, to your point, Carol, the internals not as spooky as you might have expected here. You do have about 5 sectors finishing in the green, 6 in the red, though. In terms of what performed today, it was pretty defensive. Utilities, your top performer, higher by about 0.9%. Consumer staples, higher by about 0.5%. Energy also higher on this Friday. In terms of what didn't do too hot, information technology down about 1.3% on the day. That was your biggest loser.
And we should point out a headline crossing now with that well, the Mag 7 index, guys, now in correction territory. Not quite a surprise here. I do also want to point out, Carol, before you get to the movers here, the S&P 500 basically cradling that 200-day moving average. It did close above it here, but only by about, looks like about 20 or so points.
Yeah, those technical levels matter, certainly for some who've got trades connected to that. Hey, let's go to, as I mentioned, kind of half the names in the S&P 500 actually higher.
You're going to put a happy face on this? Is that...
She's an optimistic person. It's great.
I try to. Let's go to it. It's kind of a mixed bag, so do not judge. Micron Technology up about 5% in today's session. Top gainer in, I think, both of the major indices today. Micron set to benefit from stronger than expected dynamic random access memory. We're talking about DRAM and NAND flash memory price increases. Do they report next week?
They do, Carol Massar.
Thank you so much.
That's why you have
this is why we keep you around, Romaine Bostick.
I also want to point out, not to make this all about me, which I frequently do, but as somebody who just bought a new computer, let me tell you, memory prices are insane.
Which one did you get?
Did you spring for the Neo?
No, I got a Microsoft PC.
Okay, well, nobody cares then. All right, let's go to, that was, only kidding.
Oh,
hey, who's interrupting me twice? But I was talking about Micron. Wedbush Securities, who put out this note, and we're making these comments. They reiterate their outperform rating, raised its price target to 500 from 320, and you can see Micron closing at 426 and change. Stock, by the way, is up about 50% year to date. Let's go on over to.
Some people are doing. They're saying taking their old computers and like pulling out the the RAM and stuff out of there because and then I guess you can resell that for like a song.
I do need to buy a new laptop, and I have been kind of scared, and maybe that's an option for me.
Okay, Katie, now I
need a new
am not
phone,
liking
I need a new
you as
laptop.
well for interrupting.
It's just that none of my devices charge, Carol. It's a real problem.
Okay.
Anyway.
It's like being around my siblings. All right, Lennar. Let's go to Lennar, if we may. That one definitely a little bit higher in today's session, up as much as 4% at its high intraday, finishing with a 2.6% gain. Lennar reported adjusted diluted earnings per share and revenue that missed the average analyst estimate. So it's like, but the company's CEO came out and said, while the broader market remains challenged in the near term, exacerbated by current events, we are continuing to operate with conviction and clarity, and says as affordability gradually improves, as rates find a more stable footing, and as the nation begins in earnest to address the regulatory and entitlement barriers that constrain supply, Lennar is extremely well positioned for long-term growth. So there's some optimism for you. And then I just want to put out one that we don't talk about, but we actually had the CEO. It's a Ukrainian company, telecom, mobile communications company, Kyivstar Group, and shares were up about 8.5% in today's session. Company reported earnings per share for the fourth quarter that beat the average analyst estimate. We wanted to bring this to your attention. This is a company that's got workers in Ukraine, continuing as that war, Ukraine, and Russia is now in its fifth year. It's using portable power to keep things going. It's operating, moving more to mobile to keep everybody connected using Starlink. So interesting conversation that we had with the CEO, and I highly recommend that you check it out, because they're also doing things to like keep the company running, but they're also thinking about longer term strategies. So thought it was an interesting company for you.
I got some interesting companies for you on the downside, too. I want to start with Adobe. Shares falling today, down by 7.6%. By now, you know the news. Shantanu Narayan, the company's CEO, will step down as CEO. He's going to resign from his position. And amid deep skepticism about the company's ability to thrive in the AI era, he'll be in the position until a successor has been appointed and will stay on board as chairman. That's according to Adobe. Also, shares of Meta Platforms taking a hit today. This after the New York Times reported that the company's latest AI model has underperformed expectations and will be delayed. Shares of Meta Platforms, one of those Mag 7 companies that Romaine was referring to, down 3.9% on the day today. Analysts did say the company could license Alphabet's Gemini model. Also, I want to take a look at Ulta Beauty. Shares tanking on the day today. Performed very well last year, down today by 14.2%. This after the company offered guidance for the current year that was toward the low end of Wall Street's expectations.
And Tim, they just hit like a record high, like in late February, and they're now down like 25% since that record high. So basically a bear market in the span of about 3 weeks, right?
It was a high
Is there
bar,
a consumer story there?
high.
Is there a consumer story there about how consumers have changed, how they're feeling?
I don't know. I mean, every time I sort of was going through that report yesterday, I was like, is this really about the broader consumer, or is this just specifically about Ulta?
I love when the guys talk about like the cosmetics and
That's what we do.
It's like when guys try to explain shoes to me.
Yeah,
mansplaining shoes.
Yeah, some blush.
Where do you think I get my fashion advice from, Carol?
Katie, I wish
Romaine
you could
helps me
push
out.
those boxes of them away.
All right, I do want to check in on yields real quick, because we had another sell-off this week in the yield space. The short end of the curve, we should say, at least for today, we actually did see a drop in yields, just about down about 1 basis point. And some of that had to do with the idea of that somewhat a weaker economic data we got this morning on the personal spending side, as well as that revision lower on fourth quarter GDP. Much backwards looking here, but maybe some folks thinking maybe we might get a more accommodative Fed, but still on the longer end of the curve. You did see yields higher on the day and on the week. In fact, overall, on a price basis here, we're actually seeing some of the biggest losses that we've seen on a weekly basis in the Treasury market in quite a few weeks.
Well, I got to say, Romaine, speaking of the Fed, that meeting on Wednesday has just gotten a lot more interesting. As you know, you guys have been covering this. We have this judge rejecting those subpoenas.
Is Janine Pirro allowed in that meeting?
She doesn't know who Kevin Warsh is.
No.
Which she said, which I thought was really
Never
interesting.
heard of him. Okay.
Doesn't know that now.
No, she's not. I don't think she's allowed in that meeting. I think it's only members of the
I think he was calling her during that press conference.
Someone was.
I think they would probably lock the doors.
Well, okay, so one thing that Carol and I were talking about nonstop was why appeal this if then Senator Tillis will not drop his block of Kevin Warsh to move to get confirmed. Because essentially, as Elliot Stein explained to us, this could have been an off-ramp for the president. It could have been an off-ramp for the Justice Department.
But do you remember, Tim, when they filed, when those subpoenas were first issued, there were a lot of questions as to whether the president knew about it in advance, whether he was actually on board, or whether this was the attorney going out on her own and basically just saying this is what needs to be done.
Well, that would be would kind of be mind-blowing, right? That I don't know, that if it was really truly independent, I don't know. Or maybe that's the way it should be. I don't know.
There's a lot of questions.
Yeah, there is a lot of questions.
We don't have the answers, so we just report.
Okay.
You decide.
Well, thank you for laying that out. All right.
Are you allowed to say that?
I don't think you can say that.
It's out there.
I'm sorry. Context changes everything.